Jason Statham looked at Marcus with the same intensity he had used to stare down villains in countless action movies. But this was real life, and the stakes were much more personal. The three dogs had moved closer to their owner, seeking comfort. After their traumatic experience, Rex pressed against Jason's leg, while Luna sat beside him, and Little Buster stayed close enough to feel protected, but far enough to run if needed. "Apologizing is just the beginning," Jason said, his phone still recording Marcus's humiliated face. "You are going to make real changes in your life to prove that you understand how wrong your actions were today. And I am going to make sure you follow through on every single thing I tell you to do." Marcus nodded frantically, agreeing to anything that might prevent Jason from posting the video to his millions of followers. He had no idea what the famous actor had planned for him, but it had to be better than becoming internet famous as an animal abuser. At least he hoped it would be better. "First," Jason continued, "you are going to volunteer at the Sunny Meadows Animal Shelter on Oak Street. 20 hours every week for the next 6 months. You are going to learn what it means to care for animals instead of hurting them. The shelter director is a friend of mine named Sarah Chun, and she will be expecting you tomorrow morning at 8:00 sharp." The crowd murmured approvingly at this punishment. Making an animal abuser work at an animal shelter seemed like perfect justice to most of the people watching. Several people were still recording on their phones, and Marcus realized this story was probably already spreading across social media, even without Jason posting his official version. "But that is not all," Jason added, his voice growing even more serious. "You are also going to donate money to animal rescue organizations. Half of whatever income you receive each month, whether it is from unemployment benefits, odd jobs, or eventually a real job, goes to helping animals. I will be checking on this regularly, and if you miss even one payment, my video goes public immediately." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized how much this was going to cost him. Half his income was almost everything he had to live on. But looking at Jason's determined expression and remembering the 40 million followers who would see his shame if he refused, Marcus knew he had no choice but to agree. "How will you check?" Marcus asked nervously. "I mean, how will you know if I am really donating the money?" Jason smiled for the first time since this confrontation had started, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that movie villains gave before revealing their master plan. "I have resources you cannot imagine," Jason replied. "Private investigators, accountants, lawyers, and friends in every industry. Tracking your income and donations will be easier than you think. Plus, I will be getting regular reports from Sarah at the animal shelter about your volunteer work. If you miss a single day without a good excuse, if you show up late, if you are rude to the staff or rough with the animals, I will know about it within hours." The crowd was fascinated by this real-life drama playing out before them. Many people had pulled up Jason Statham's social media accounts on their phones and were showing each other his massive follower counts. Everyone understood that this man had the power to make Marcus's life very difficult if he chose to do so. "There is one more thing," Jason said, holding up his phone to make sure Marcus could see it clearly. "You are going to give me your phone number, your address, and your email. I am going to check in with you personally every month to make sure you are keeping up with your obligations. And if I ever hear about you hurting another animal, not only will I post this video, but I will make it my personal mission to make sure everyone in the world knows what kind of person you really are." Marcus rattled off his contact information while Jason entered it into his phone. The actor's fingers moved quickly across the screen, probably already setting up reminders to follow through on his threats. Marcus had never felt so completely under someone else's control in his entire life. 6 months later, Marcus Williams was working at the Sunny Meadows Animal Shelter, just as Jason had demanded. What had started as a punishment had slowly transformed into something unexpected. Marcus found himself arriving early most days and staying late to help with evening feedings. Sarah Chun, the the shelter director, had been skeptical at first when Jason Statham personally delivered this reluctant volunteer to her door. "He abused my dogs," Jason had explained to Sarah. "But I think people can change if they are given the right motivation. Give him the hardest jobs, the most difficult animals, and do not let him get away with anything. If he gives you any trouble at all, call me immediately." For the first few weeks, Marcus had been resentful and afraid. He did his required hours and nothing more, counting down the days until his sentence would be finished. He was terrified of the larger dogs and uncomfortable around the cats. Several times he had considered just running away and starting over in another city, but he knew Jason would find him and make good on his threats. The turning point came when a severely injured pit bull named Hope was brought to the shelter. She had been used in dog fighting and was covered in scars, terrified of any human contact. Most of the volunteers were afraid to work with her because she growled and snapped at anyone who came too close to her cage. But Marcus saw something familiar in Hope's eyes. The same fear and anger that he had carried around for years, the same mistrust of a world that had been cruel and unfair. He started spending extra time near her cage, just sitting quietly and talking softly about nothing important. Slowly, over many weeks, Hope began to trust him. The day Hope finally let Marcus pet her through the cage bars was the day he truly understood what he had done to Rex, Luna, and Buster. This dog had every reason to hate humans, but she had chosen to trust again. Marcus realized that the animals he had abused for fun had shown him more forgiveness than he had ever shown anyone in his own life. Sarah Chun noticed the change in Marcus and mentioned it to Jason during one of his monthly check-in calls. "He is different now," she reported. "He genuinely cares about the animals. I think you might have actually saved him from himself." Jason visited the shelter unannounced one evening to see for himself. He found Marcus gently helping an elderly volunteer bathe a rescued beagle, his movements patient and careful. The cruel laughter that had once accompanied his abuse of animals had been replaced by quiet concentration and obvious compassion. When Marcus noticed Jason watching him, he froze for a moment, remembering that terrible day 6 months earlier. But Jason just nodded approvingly and left without saying a word. Justice had been served, not through punishment alone, but through transformation that made the world a better place for innocent creatures who could not defend themselves. The story had spread across the internet exactly as Jason had planned. But instead of destroying Marcus, it had inspired thousands of people to volunteer at their local animal shelters. Sometimes the best revenge was helping someone become a better person than they ever thought they could be. Judge Marcus Williams walked through the busy Chicago airport terminal carrying his black leather briefcase and small rolling suitcase. The 62-year-old man moved with quiet confidence despite feeling tired from the long week. His dark suit was perfectly pressed, and his silver hair was neatly trimmed. People passing by had no idea they were looking at one of the most respected federal judges in the country. Marcus had spent the last 5 days hearing complex legal cases that would affect thousands of people. From corporate fraud trials to civil rights disputes, his courtroom had been packed with lawyers, reporters, and concerned citizens. Every decision he made carried weight. Every word he spoke could change lives. The responsibility never felt light on his shoulders, but after 15 years on the federal bench, he had learned to carry it with grace. Now he just wanted to go home to Atlanta. His wife Sarah would be waiting with dinner, and his grown children might stop by to visit. Simple pleasures felt more valuable after weeks like this one. The thought of his own bed and quiet house made him smile as he approached the gate for flight 447. The first-class section of the airplane was nearly empty when Marcus boarded. He found his seat, 2A, right where it should be by the window. The leather seat was comfortable and spacious, perfect for the 3-hour flight ahead. He placed his briefcase in the overhead compartment and settled in with his legal documents. Even on vacation, a judge's work never truly ended. There were always cases to review, decisions to consider, and letters to read. As Marcus organized his papers, he noticed the flight attendant working in the first-class cabin. Sandra Mitchell was a woman in her early 40s with blonde hair, pulled back in a tight bun. Her uniform was spotless, and her movements were quick and efficient. She had been working for the airline for 8 years and took pride in running a tight ship. But there was something in her eyes when she looked at Marcus that made him slightly uncomfortable. Sandra had noticed Marcus the moment he boarded. Something about him bothered her, though she could not quite put her finger on it. In her 8 years of flying, she had developed what she called a sixth sense about passengers. She could spot troublemakers, people trying to sneak into better seats, and those who might cause problems during the flight. Her coworkers sometimes said she was too quick to judge, but Sandra believed her instincts kept everyone safe. Marcus carried himself seemed wrong to her. He was too comfortable, too relaxed in first class. In Sandra's experience, people who belonged in expensive seats acted differently. They were usually white businessmen in expensive suits talking loudly on phones about important deals, or wealthy elderly couples wearing designer clothes and jewelry. Marcus was different. He was quiet, focused on his paperwork, and seemed to belong there too naturally. Sandra watched as Marcus pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. The papers looked official and important, but that made her even more suspicious. Anyone could print fake documents these days. She had heard stories about people using counterfeit tickets or switching boarding passes to get better seats. The airline trained flight attendants to watch for these tricks, and Sandra considered herself an expert at catching cheaters. Other passengers began boarding the plane. A young white businessman took the seat across the aisle from Marcus. An elderly white couple settled into seats 3C and 3D. A middle-aged white woman in an expensive dress claimed seat 1A. Sandra greeted each of these passengers warmly, offering them drinks and making sure they were comfortable. She smiled brightly and spoke in her sweetest professional voice. These were the kinds of people she expected to see in first class, but her eyes kept drifting back to Marcus. Something about his presence in that expensive seat felt wrong to her. She had worked this route dozens of times and rarely saw passengers like him in first class. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that something fishy was going on. Marcus was completely unaware of Sandra's growing suspicion. He was absorbed in reading a complex brief about environmental law. The case involved a major corporation accused of polluting a river that supplied drinking water to several small towns. The evidence was compelling, but the legal arguments were complicated. Marcus made notes in the margins and highlighted important passages. This was the kind of work that required his full attention. The plane was almost ready for takeoff when Marcus decided he needed to get more comfortable for the long flight ahead. His back had been bothering him after sitting in courtrooms all week, and the airplane seat, while nice, was not quite giving him the support he needed. He remembered seeing other first-class passengers ask for extra pillows on previous flights. It seemed like a reasonable request. Marcus looked up from his papers and caught Sandra's attention as she walked past his row. She was checking that all passengers had their seatbelts fastened and their seats in the upright position for takeoff. Her movements were brisk and professional, but Marcus noticed her jaw was tight and her smile seemed forced when she looked at him. He raised his hand politely to get her attention. Sandra stopped and turned toward him with a look that was not quite friendly. There was something cold in her eyes that Marcus found puzzling. He had dealt with all kinds of people in his courtroom, from nervous witnesses to hostile defendants. So he recognized the signs of someone who had already made up their mind about him. The other first-class passengers were settling in for the flight. Some were reading magazines. Others were checking their phones one last time before takeoff. The atmosphere should have been calm and pleasant, but Marcus could feel tension building, though he did not yet understand why. Sandra stood beside his seat waiting for him to speak. Her body language was stiff and unwelcoming. Marcus maintained his usual calm and respectful demeanor. In all his years as a judge, he had learned that treating people with courtesy and dignity usually worked better than confrontation. He had no idea that his simple request for comfort was about to trigger a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. The airplane engines were warming up outside. The captain was making final preparations for departure. Other passengers were getting comfortable for the journey ahead. Everything seemed normal and routine. But Sandra Mitchell had already decided that Marcus Williams did not belong in seat 2A, and she was about to make that opinion very clear to everyone. On board Flight 447. Marcus looked up at Sandra with his usual gentle smile. He had spent years in courtrooms learning to read people, and something about her expression made him choose his words carefully. Her body language was tense, and her eyes seemed to be studying him rather than simply waiting to help. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely. "Would it be possible to get an extra pillow? My back is bothering me after a long week, and I think it would help me rest during the flight." Sandra's expression immediately hardened. She crossed her arms and looked down at Marcus with obvious suspicion. Her voice was sharp and cold when she responded. "First-class amenities are for paying customers only. I need to see your boarding pass again." Marcus was taken aback by her hostile tone. In all his years of flying, he had never been spoken to this way by airline staff. He had made a simple, polite request that flight attendants handled dozens of times every day. Her response was not just rude, it was completely inappropriate for someone in customer service. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand," Marcus replied calmly. "I am a paying customer. I showed you my boarding pass when I boarded, and I'm sitting in my assigned seat." Sandra's voice grew louder, loud enough that other passengers began to notice. "Anyone can sit in any seat if they board early enough. I've seen it happen before. People switch tickets, use fake boarding passes, or sneak into better seats when no one's looking. I need to verify that you actually belong here." The businessman across the aisle looked up from his laptop with a confused expression. The elderly couple in row 3 stopped their quiet conversation and turned to watch. The woman in seat 1 lowered her magazine and stared at the unfolding drama. Marcus could feel the weight of their attention, and he noticed some passengers were already reaching for their phones. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his boarding pass. He handed it to Sandra with the same calm dignity he used in his courtroom every day. Years of dealing with difficult people had taught him that staying composed was always the best approach. Even when facing unreasonable behavior, Sandra snatched the boarding pass from his hand and examined it with exaggerated suspicion. She held it up to the light as if looking for hidden marks or signs of tampering. She compared the seat number to the number above Marcus's head multiple times. She studied every detail with the intensity of a detective examining evidence at a crime scene. "This doesn't look right," Sandra announced loudly enough for half the first-class cabin to hear. "Something about this boarding pass seems off. The printing looks different from the others I've seen today." Marcus felt his patience being tested, but he maintained his calm exterior. "I can assure you that boarding pass is completely legitimate. I purchased my ticket through the airline's website 3 days ago using my credit card. I received a confirmation email and checked in online yesterday." Sandra waved his boarding pass in the air dismissively. "Everyone has a story. I've heard every excuse in the book. People will say anything to try to keep seats they don't belong in. I've seen passengers use fake IDs, stolen credit cards, and counterfeit tickets. I'm not going to be fooled by some elaborate scheme." The entire first-class cabin was now focused on their confrontation. Passengers in economy class were stretching their necks to see what was happening. Some had their phones out and were clearly recording the incident. Marcus could see flight attendants from other sections gathering near the front of the plane. Whispering among themselves and looking concerned, Marcus took a deep breath and spoke in the same measured tone he used when addressing juries. "Ma'am, I understand you're trying to do your job, but I have done nothing wrong. I am Marcus Williams, and I am a federal judge returning home to Atlanta after a week of court proceedings in Chicago. My ticket was purchased legitimately, and I have every right to be in this seat." Sandra's reaction was swift and mocking. She let out a harsh laugh that echoed through the cabin. "A federal judge? Oh, that's rich. That's the most creative story I've heard yet. Next you'll be telling me you're the President of the United States." Her voice dripped with sarcasm as she continued. "Listen, whoever you really are, I've been doing this job for 8 years. I can spot a scammer from a mile away. Federal judges don't dress like you, they don't act like you, and they certainly don't fly on regular commercial flights like this." Marcus felt a familiar sting of recognition. He had faced this kind of prejudice before, though rarely so blatantly. As a black man who had achieved success in a predominantly white profession, he was used to people questioning his credentials, his authority, and his right to be in certain spaces. But it never stopped hurting, and it never stopped being wrong. The businessman across the aisle cleared his throat and spoke up. "Excuse me, but this seems unnecessary. The man is sitting quietly in his assigned seat. Why are you giving him such a hard time?" Sandra whirled around to face the businessman. "Sir, please stay out of this. I'm trained to spot fraudulent passengers, and I'm just doing my job. This man is clearly trying to scam his way into first class, and I won't allow it on my flight." The elderly woman in row 3 shook her head in disgust. "This is embarrassing." The poor man asked for a pillow, not the crown jewels. But Sandra was not backing down. If anything, the attention from other passengers seemed to energize her. She felt vindicated in her suspicions and was determined to prove she was right. In her mind, she was protecting the airline and its legitimate customers from a clever fraud. "I've seen this exact scenario before," Sandra announced to the cabin. "Smooth-talking individuals who dress the part and have their stories all rehearsed. They count on people feeling sorry for them or being too polite to question their credentials. Well, I'm not fooled, and I'm not going to let this slide." Marcus realized that Sandra was not going to listen to reason. Her mind was made up, and she was committed to her course of action, regardless of evidence or logic. He had seen this kind of stubborn prejudice in his courtroom before, usually from defendants who refused to accept responsibility for their actions. The flight captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing that they would be departing shortly and asking all passengers to prepare for takeoff. But Sandra showed no signs of ending her confrontation. Instead, she seemed to be building towards something bigger. "I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and move to your real seat," Sandra said firmly. "And if you can't produce a legitimate ticket for first class, you'll be removed from this flight entirely." Marcus looked around the cabin at the faces of fellow passengers. Some looked embarrassed by Sandra's behavior. Others seemed curious about how the situation would resolve. A few appeared to be enjoying the drama. But all of them were watching, and many were recording. He knew that whatever happened next would likely be seen by thousands of people within hours. Social media had made every public confrontation a potential viral moment. Marcus realized that his response to Sandra's unreasonable demands would not just affect him, but could impact the important work he did as a judge and the respect people had for the justice system. The airplane engines grew louder as the plane prepared to taxi toward the runway. But Sandra Mitchell was not finished with her accusations, and Marcus Williams was about to face the most public challenge to his dignity and authority that he had experienced in his distinguished career. Marcus could feel the eyes of every passenger in first class watching him. The weight of their stares was heavy, but he had learned long ago how to carry himself with dignity even in the most difficult situations. His years on the federal bench had taught him that how he responded to challenges reflected not just on him, but on the entire justice system he represented. "Ma'am," Marcus said in his calm courtroom voice, "I understand you believe you are doing your job, but you are making a serious mistake. I have shown you my legitimate boarding pass. I have explained who I am. I am asking you politely to treat me with the same respect you would show any other passenger." Sandra's face was flushed with anger and determination. She felt like Marcus was trying to make her look foolish in front of everyone, and that made her even more convinced she was right. In her mind, his calm demeanor was just part of his act. Criminals in her experience were often smooth talkers who tried to seem reasonable while they were breaking the rules. "Don't try to turn this around on me," Sandra snapped. "I know exactly what you're doing. You're trying to make me feel bad, so I'll back down and let you keep a seat you didn't pay for. Well, it's not going to work. I've seen this manipulation tactic before." The businessman across the aisle shook his head in disbelief. He pulled out his phone and started recording, joining several other passengers who were capturing the confrontation. The elderly couple looked embarrassed and kept whispering to each other about how inappropriate Sandra's behavior was becoming. Marcus noticed the phones pointed in his direction. He had always been a private person who avoided publicity, but he understood that this situation was quickly spinning beyond his control. Every word he said and every gesture he made was being recorded by multiple people. Within hours, this incident would probably be viewed by thousands of strangers on social media. "I am not trying to manipulate anyone," Marcus replied steadily. "I am simply asking to be treated fairly. I have followed all the rules, purchased my ticket properly, and done nothing to deserve this treatment." Sandra crossed her arms and raised her voice even louder. "Oh, so now you're the victim? That's perfect. First you try to steal a first-class seat, then you claim to be some important judge, and now you want everyone to feel sorry for you. This is textbook scammer behavior." The woman in seat 1 finally spoke up. "This is ridiculous. I've been watching this whole thing, and this gentleman has been nothing but polite. You're the one making a scene." But Sandra was beyond listening to other passengers. She felt attacked from all sides and was determined to prove that her instincts were correct. "You don't understand what's really happening here. This man is running a sophisticated con game. He probably studies flight patterns, dresses up in expensive clothes, and targets flights where he thinks he can get away with seat theft." Marcus took a deep breath and tried a different approach. He had dealt with many unreasonable people in his courtroom, and sometimes the best strategy was to remain completely factual and let their behavior speak for itself. "I purchased seat 2 on Flight 447 from Chicago to Atlanta on June 13th at 3:47 p.m. using my American Express card ending in 4829. My confirmation number is RBX 471. I checked in online yesterday evening at 7:23 p.m. I arrived at the airport 2 hours early, went through security without incident, and boarded this flight with my legitimate boarding pass. These are facts that can be easily verified." Sandra waved her hand dismissively. Anyone can memorize fake numbers. Criminals do their homework. They know that if they sound confident and throw around specific details, people will believe them. But I'm not falling for it. At that moment, Captain Rodriguez emerged from the cockpit. He was a veteran pilot with 25 years of experience who had seen his share of passenger disputes. But something about the heated voices and the crowd of phones recording made him realize this was not an ordinary disagreement. "What seems to be the problem here?" Captain Rodriguez asked in his authoritative but calm pilot voice. Sandra immediately turned to face the captain, grateful to have someone in authority who could back up her position. "Captain, I caught this passenger trying to scam his way into first class. He's sitting in a seat he didn't pay for, and when I confronted him about it, he started making up stories about being a federal judge." Captain Rodriguez looked at Marcus. taking in his professional appearance, his calm demeanor, and the legal documents still spread across his tray table. Then he looked at Sandra, whose face was red with excitement and whose body language showed she was highly agitated. "Sir," the captain said to Marcus, "may I see your boarding pass and identification?" Marcus handed over both documents without hesitation. Captain Rodriguez examined them carefully, comparing the photo on Marcus's driver's license to his face, checking that the boarding pass matched his seat assignment, and looking for any signs that the documents might be fake or altered. While the captain reviewed his papers, Marcus remained perfectly still and quiet. He knew that his behavior in this moment would be crucial. Any sign of nervousness or defensiveness could be misinterpreted as guilt. Instead, he projected the same calm confidence he used when presiding over his courtroom. "These documents appear to be in order," Captain Rodriguez said after his examination. "But given the seriousness of the accusation, I think we need to verify your identity more thoroughly." Sandra's eyes lit up with victory. "Exactly. Anyone can carry fake IDs these days. We need to do a proper background check before we let him stay in that expensive seat." Marcus nodded understanding. "Captain, I appreciate your thorough approach to the situation. I am indeed Federal Judge Marcus Williams from the Northern District of Georgia. If you need verification, I can provide you with contact information for my court clerk, my chambers, or the courthouse administrative office." "That won't be necessary," Sandra interrupted. "He's obviously prepared for this. He probably has accomplices ready to answer phones and pretend to be court officials. These scammer networks are very sophisticated." Captain Rodriguez held up his hand to silence Sandra. He was beginning to get a clearer picture of what was really happening. In his experience, legitimate passengers cooperated calmly with verification procedures, while people with something to hide became defensive or tried to rush the process. Marcus's willingness to provide multiple ways to confirm his identity suggested he was telling the truth. "Sir," the captain said to Marcus, "if you don't mind, I would like to make a call to verify your position. Can you give me a number for your court office?" Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts and found the direct number for his clerk, Patricia Chun. Patricia had worked with him for over 10 years and would certainly be able to confirm his identity. "You can call my clerk, Patricia Chun, at this number," Marcus said, showing the captain his phone screen. "She handles my schedule and correspondence, and she will be able to verify who I am." Sandra shook her head vigorously. "This is exactly what I was talking about. He has it all planned out. That's probably his girlfriend or his partner in crime, ready to lie for him. You can't trust anything he says." Captain Rodriguez was growing tired of Sandra's constant interruptions and wild theories. Her behavior was becoming more disruptive than helpful, and he was starting to doubt her judgment about the situation. "Ma'am, please let me handle this," the captain said firmly to Sandra. Then he turned back to Marcus. "If you could make that call, I would appreciate it." Marcus dialed Patricia's number and waited for her to answer. The entire first-class cabin fell silent as everyone strained to hear what would happen next. This phone call would either prove Marcus was telling the truth or expose him as an elaborate fraud. The stakes could not have been higher. The phone rang 3 times before Patricia Chun answered. Her voice was clear and professional as she said, "Judge Williams' chambers. This is Patricia speaking." Marcus felt a wave of relief at hearing his trusted clerk's familiar voice. "Patricia, this is Judge Williams. I'm calling from an airplane where there seems to be some confusion about my identity. The captain would like to speak with you to verify who I am." Patricia's voice immediately shifted to concern. "Of course, Your Honor. Is everything all right?" Marcus handed the phone to Captain Rodriguez, who introduced himself politely. "Hello, this is Captain Rodriguez from Flight 447. I have a passenger here claiming to be Federal Judge Marcus Williams, and I need to verify his identity." Sandra stood close to the captain, straining to hear every word of the conversation. She was still convinced this was all part of an elaborate plan, and she expected the person on the phone to hang up or give themselves away somehow. Patricia's voice was strong and clear, through the phone speaker. "Yes, Captain Rodriguez. Judge Marcus Williams is indeed a federal judge in the Northern District of Georgia. He has served on the bench for 15 years. He was in Chicago this week for a judicial conference and legal proceedings. I made his travel arrangements myself." Captain Rodriguez asked several specific questions to make sure this was not some kind of setup. "Can you describe Judge Williams for me?" "Certainly," Patricia replied without hesitation. "Judge Williams is 62 years old, approximately 6 feet tall, with silver hair and a distinguished appearance. He typically wears dark suits for travel and carries a black leather briefcase. He's known for his calm demeanor and his fairness." In the courtroom, the captain looked at Marcus, comparing Patricia's description to the man sitting in seat 2. Every detail matched perfectly. Sandra's face was beginning to show the first signs of doubt, though she was still not ready to admit. She might be wrong. Patricia continued speaking, and her voice carried clearly through the quiet cabin. "Judge Williams is one of the most respected jurists in the federal system. He has presided over several high-profile cases and is known for his integrity and dedication to justice. Is there some kind of problem?" Captain Rodriguez glanced at Sandra, whose face was now noticeably pale. There was a question about his boarding pass and seat assignment. The flight attendant had some concerns. Patricia's voice became sharper with indignation. "I'm sorry, what kind of concerns?" "Judge Williams purchased his ticket through proper channels, and I have all the documentation in my files. What exactly is happening there?" Sandra suddenly reached for the phone, unable to contain herself any longer. "Let me talk to her. I can tell if this is real or fake." Captain Rodriguez hesitated, but decided to hand the phone to Sandra. Perhaps direct communication would finally resolve this situation one way or another. "Hello," Sandra said into the phone, her voice still aggressive, but slightly less confident than before. "This is Sandra Mitchell, flight attendant on Flight 447. I need to verify that this passenger is really who he claims to be." Patricia's response was immediate and sharp. "Ms. Mitchell, I don't understand why you would question Judge Williams' identity. He is a federal judge, and questioning his credentials without cause is highly inappropriate." Sandra tried to maintain her position. "I've been trained to spot fraudulent passengers, and something about this situation doesn't seem right." "How do I know you're really who you say you are?" There was a moment of silence before Patricia responded, and when she did, her voice carried the authority of someone who had worked in the federal court system for over a decade. "Ms. Mitchell, I am Patricia Chun, Senior Clerk to Judge Marcus Williams of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. Judge Williams was appointed to the federal bench by the President and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Has an office in the Richard B. Russell Federal Building in Atlanta. His phone number is 4042151500. His email address is listed in the Federal Judicial Directory. Would you like me to provide his bar number or any other official credentials?" Sandra's confidence was cracking. The woman on the phone sounded completely legitimate and was providing specific details that would be very difficult to fake. But Sandra had already gone too far to back down easily. "Anyone can look up information online and memorize it," Sandra said weakly. Patricia's voice became ice cold. "Ms. Mitchell, I am going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. What exactly has Judge Williams done to make you question his right to be on that airplane?" Sandra looked around the cabin at all the passengers watching her. Their faces showed a mixture of curiosity, embarrassment, and growing anger at her behavior. The phones were still recording every word she said. "He just doesn't look like he belongs in first class," Sandra finally admitted. "In my experience, Federal judges are usually different types of people. The silence that followed Sandra's statement was deafening. Everyone in the cabin understood exactly what she meant by different types of people. The businessman across the aisle shook his head in disgust. The elderly couple looked mortified. Even passengers from economy class, who had been watching, were visibly upset. Patricia's voice came through the phone speaker with barely controlled anger. "Miss Mitchell, are you saying that you question Judge Williams' credentials because of his race?" Sandra realized she had said too much. "That's not what I meant. I just thought something seemed suspicious." "What seemed suspicious?" Patricia demanded. "A black man sitting in first class. Is that what raised your suspicions?" "Captain." Rodriguez took the phone back from Sandra, who was now clearly flustered and defensive. "Ma'am, I apologize for this situation. I can assure you that we will handle this matter appropriately." Patricia's voice was still firm, but slightly calmer when speaking to the captain. "Captain Rodriguez, Judge Williams is a distinguished member of the federal judiciary who deserves to be treated with respect. What has happened on your flight today is completely unacceptable." "I understand completely," Captain Rodriguez replied. "We will make sure Judge Williams is comfortable for the remainder of his flight, and we will address this incident with our staff." Marcus had remained silent throughout the phone conversation, allowing the truth to speak for itself. Now he gently took the phone back from the captain. "Patricia, thank you for handling this so professionally. I'll speak with you when I return to Chambers next week." "Of course, Your Honor. I'm so sorry this happened to you. Have a safe flight." Marcus ended the call and looked around the cabin. The atmosphere had completely changed. Where there had been curiosity and uncertainty before, now there was clear embarrassment and anger directed at Sandra's behavior. Captain Rodriguez turned to face Sandra, whose face was now bright red with shame and panic. She realized that her certainty about Marcus being a fraud had been completely wrong, and that her behavior had been witnessed and recorded by dozens of people. "Ms. Mitchell," the captain said in a stern voice, "we need to discuss this situation privately." But the damage was already done. The phones had captured everything. Sandra's discriminatory assumptions had been exposed in the most public way possible, and Marcus Williams, who had simply wanted to fly home peacefully, had been forced to prove his worth and dignity to a plane full of strangers because of one person's prejudice. The flight was about to take off, but for Sandra Mitchell, her career in the airline industry was about to crash and burn.